Anatola, very excited to meet your brain, your face, your thoughts, your ideas, everything today. Min, I think got to meet you in person. Am I right about that? At Artist in the
Right, at
Machine
Artist in the
in New York.
Machine, where she was an
So
amazing MC.
amazing. But look, you have been a futurist, which I think everybody thinks they're futurists now because everybody loves making sci-fi movies on their AI tools. But you seem to do it in a real way. Can you just, for the sake of people who haven't met yet, can you tell us a little bit about where you've been, where you are, and what you're working on?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first, I'm a human being on this really big, confusing planet, so that's fun, as I'm sure you all agree with. And I'm a new media artist, futurist, founder of my studio, Reimagined Story Lab. And I like to, some people collect baseball cards or figurines, and I like to collect visions for the future because I believe that with so many grim and dystopian fantasies that are swirling around in our collective imagination, that having hope for, a future that we want to live in is this radical and courageous act. So it really started in workshops that I gave where I discovered how a lot of people think, especially when it comes to technology, that terrible and apocalyptic things might happen. And also in the stories that we tell about the future, there's a lot of those same visions in popular media. So I thought, what if we tell stories about worlds that are constructive for us to experiment with in terms of how not just technology can shape our future, but also the types of societies and urban environments we live in and cultures that we are a part of and the types of way we relate to one another as a community. And so it's definitely a big fascination with me, especially ways we can learn from the ancient past and bring some of those things into the future.
So, the ancient past and
Mhm.
the future, how do those intersect for you?
Yeah. So there's a lot of examples of things that we did in ancient cities of the past that I think should totally be brought back and revitalized. And they might look different in this time, especially with the technology we have, but they would still be helpful. And it is kind of like you can think of time like a spiral in terms of history repeats itself in certain ways, but it's still evolving and it's on this upward trajectory. So an example is indigenous clay pipes, because indigenous communities would often use clay pipes in their irrigation systems to carry water across cities and in communities. And today we use steel pipes often, which we have found also causes rust and erosion and can contaminate our drinking water. And so, some places I learned in LA on the tour of the LA River, which of course is just a giant slab of cement that sometimes has dirty water in it, that some places are advocating for replacing steel pipes with clay pipes, just like in ancient ways did, but also is a lot more sustainable and better for us.
It makes me wonder, like, how that intersects with AI, because we're like in this rush towards the new. We're in this rush towards accelerating. What does this intelligent thing or set of things do for us? And at the same time, are like exponentially in some ways a lot of things that were like that made us human or made us kind of special in some way. Like I always think about like how like there's people used to get on a boat and they could sense a storm coming away. 1 week from now. Just by how they felt the temperature. They were their own barometer. Like they had that kind of sense. You know. So I wonder, like, is AI going to help us to, or can AI help us to come closer to what ancient practices are, as well as nature, like, or are we just careening you know farther and farther away from that? You know what I mean?
So I love what you said, and it reminds me of how AI can enhance human intuition in our inherent connection to nature and um, everything around us. But it also brings up something that I saw a lot in earlier this year, I had the opportunity to teach my first college class to undergrad and graduate students, and it was on one of my favorite topics, Afrofuturism. And everyone was invited to create their own world building deck, and were allowed to use AI. And something that came up a lot was the representation of AI as an ancient medium. So, an AI oracle, for instance, there's always this vision of an oracle in cultural stories, or if you think of the Matrix, the oracle is this wise older woman or something. But a lot of young people were exploring the idea of AI as an oracle, or even holograph technology to simulate something like a campfire that doesn't need the same resources or can't burn, but is still a campfire that represents something that people gather around to tell stories like we have throughout millennia. So I think that that blending of the future and the past is really powerful still.
Can I just, I think I've interacted with Afrofuturism before, but just in case listeners, again, what an opportunity to hear from you what it means to you. Like it obviously, in as a distinction from regular futurism, whatever that means. Like what can you define Afrofuturism, and especially what was in this class that you taught, to give us context?
Yeah, so I see Afrofuturism as a framework or invitation to tell stories of futures where people from the global Africa are liberated and fully self expressed and engage with new technology in order to make a world of abundance. And it's sort of the same blueprint that you can use for any culture, especially cultures that have been historically marginalized or just feel like they don't live inside of an imaginary that is for them. Because we know that if we look around at this computer or a candle or something, that everything first had to be imagined and designed. But then when you look around at the world, who imagine that, but then who did they imagine it for? So it's this opportunity to think and design a world that is in a Black cultural imaginary, or is within an imaginary that is from your own culture or yourself, if you ever feel othered or like you're on the sidelines somehow. And I also think that there's this real path of that kind of storytelling to be the gateway to actual scientific discoveries. And it kind of provides the inspiration for engineers and inventors and scientists to take those stories and then make those worlds real from it.
Love that, and it reminds me of that there's another podcast that I won't suddenly chew up time repeating. It's called Moonrise, and it was all about how we got to the moon. I don't know if you heard it. It was Lillian
Very
Cunningham
cool.
was for Washington Post. But what's interesting is, like, at least most people assume, like, I don't know, JFK did something, or Americans built NASA or something. But there's this whole section of that podcast that actually spends a lot of time with the science fiction writers of the early 20th century, and how it maybe because Einstein was popular, or it was more in popular culture with Oppenheimer and stuff. There was a lot of people that turned to science and wanted to tell stories. And the sort of the thesis of that podcast is that in some ways the reason we got to the moon is because people started writing stories about it, and in some ways, like, it incepted into sort of, like, broader culture, and in some ways society, the urgency to do it. And I guess, like, how do you compare something you call futurism, Afrofuturism, to science fiction as a endeavor? Are they all kind of different ways of talking about the same big idea?
Right. I think they're all kind of under a similar umbrella, but different in terms of the culture that it's about, but also a distinction is you're trying to get to that place of liberation, because science fiction could still be more pessimistic or more having visions that you wouldn't want to see or aren't constructive to live in. Um, for instance, Adrienne Marie Brown has this collection of anthology series called Octavia's Brood that introduces this term visionary fiction, which she argues is just like science fiction, except it's using science fiction as a tool for organizing and argues that all organizing and activism is science fiction. So it's kind of that intentionality behind what you're doing. And I also 1000% agree with what you said. I love saying that imagination makes it possible to see what science enables. And I always tell the story of Robert Goddard, who's known as the inventor of the modern day rocket ship. And he credits the day when he was a little boy and read a science fiction book about going to Mars. He dedicated himself to being an engineer and inventing the actual rocket ship that could get us there that we use today.
Mm.
I love that. So we're obviously in a community of a lot of storytellers, and I think there is I would say a disproportionate amount of people making movies about other planets and
Yeah.
either dystopian or utopian futures. It's interesting that I wonder if we're all sort of part of a new wave of not just imagining the future, but it's sort of incepting something that actually will be designed and built to go to the work you're actually doing.
Mhm.
I mean, I had a follow-up question to that, but Min, what are you ruminating on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about, because apocalyptic dark science fiction is so popular, I think, because of drama. People just like the drama, and the drama creates conflict, and it's interesting in that way. At the same time, there's these like rare kind of like visionary science fiction. I feel like Black Panther or Star Trek: The Next Generation. Like there are these rare IP that have managed to figure it out, where they have like this futuristic vision of what a positive future could look like, and then they have these conflicts instead. So like there's still conflict. It's just like it's not calamitous. It's not like the world is ending. I feel like it's difficult, to do it well, and it's and I think it's interesting that, and maybe this gets into what is the distinction between Afrofuturism and other types of futurism, and like what is the kind of what is the dilemma therein, right, from that community that leads to kind of that allows for like better visions of the future than than other forms of zombie fiction and things like this, which we're kind of almost like too used to.
Right. Right. Because I mean, zombie fiction can be fun. I saw Sinners. It was a great movie. And so I want to make
Oh my God,
a,
I didn't realize Sinners was zombies. I
I know, I was so surprised
recant everything I said.
watch
I gotta wait.
trailers, but like, oh, spoilers. Maybe not zombies. It was vampires, but similar. But anyways, I want to also be clear that it's not this war between positive and negative visions of the future, because sometimes we need those tales of what not to do, like fables and myths, like The Boy Who Cried Wolf, that teaches us exactly what not to do. And they're also interesting and engaging, like you said. But I think the distinction is constructive to build upon and constructive to be a part of the story we're all going on to inform our idea of what the world can be like. So I think there's a place for those more dark visions. And then there's also a place for stories with morals, even if they're hidden under other themes, and a space for more diverse stories that just give other perspectives and examples of what the world can be.
I mean, I remember my fantasy fiction class in college where we also drifted into science fiction. Like, yeah, all of these things are either cautionary tales or sort of scripts for a possible future that we're almost prototyping by playing it out in literature. It's super interesting. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's a fun exercise on this call, like to recall the Matrix, and maybe you're our oracle today, because I feel like you spent a lot of time thinking about this. Like, what's a story that you're spending a lot of time thinking about a near or far future, that is, I don't know, maybe a consequence of what we're in right now? I'm curious, what do you think we might be surprised by? What do you think we might not be surprised by about what you're starting to imagine?
Yeah, I mean, The Matrix is such a classic. There is
Sorry.
no spoon, I'm just still trying to bend a spoon as my biggest dream. But right now, Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower comes to mind, just because of how visionary it was right now, and especially at the beginning of the year when there's the wildfires in LA, which is where I currently live, it was all pointing directly to that book and how it took place in this exact year, starting in 2024, with wildfires in LA. And it also tells a story of more this inequality where people don't have the things we're used to survive. And you can see how that is happening right now with the rise of homeless and how we don't have enough affordable housing and so many people are housing insecure or underemployed. And you can see how that story is really possible in our world today. And the book,
It seems like a near future. That's not
yeah,
very far. Yeah.
yeah, but it was written in the 80s, which makes you wonder what was going on. But the book ends with them starting their own community and planting seeds to start this new world. And so that's another quote that I loved hearing recently, that as storytellers, you are planting seeds and that hopefully your seeds fall on fertile soil. So Octavia Butler was certainly planting some powerful seeds with that one.
What are you? What seeds are you planting? I love the knowing where other authors have been, but are you imagining like maybe perhaps closer to some of these AI tools that we're playing with? Like, are you starting to extrapolate? What is this? Some people think it could lead to more inequality. I don't know. Like some people have sort of really unfortunate reactions to this.
I mean,
I
I
think
guess
it's an ongoing transfer of wealth or something. I don't know. What are consequences are you imagining? Sorry, Min, what were we going to say?
yeah, I was gonna to pair with that. Like, I guess one of the ironies of AI is that, or the ironies of like kind of trying to think of a utopian vision of what AI is going to do to humanity is that the trope, it's very tropey now that AI is kind of evil. That we are just such an ideological moment with AI. Where there's like the anti-AI and then there's the pro-AI, and we're just in this weird, like caught up in this weird ideological conversation. We can't escape.
Yeah, it can seem very polarizing, certainly, and have even faced slack myself for engaging with AI because people are saying, you know, these tools, they're terrible for the environment and so unequal. And it's super true and needs to be addressed in the way that we use it. So it leads to one thing I am excited about or planting, which is AI that is able to help us return to nature. One thing that I love that excites me about AI is its ability to decode animal communication, like studies about it helping us decode whale noises or wolf noises that can literally help us speak to animals, which is a very magical idea. And more on that note, a seed that I'm planting is sustainable cities and more regenerative housing and architecture. I am personally obsessed with geodesic domes, so I totally see a future like Buckminster
I
Fuller.
was gonna say, fuck
Imagine
Mr. Fuller,
that's filled
geodesic
with
domes,
like full,
the Fuller
yeah,
thesis.
full biophilic shapes.
We're spaceship Earth now.
Yes, let's go. Boom, boom.
So far we have a world where there's late night talk shows hosted by
Yes, that's a great
inside
idea.
giant, well sustained geodesic structures.
You
I'm
could
liking
live in
this.
Shark Tales.
Why not?
Reimagine.
um, it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot about the evolution of storytelling and like people used to gather around campfires and somebody would memorize the Odyssey, and then this thing called a book came along, and then we could take that book with us and read it in our free time. And we're in this new Cambrian moment too, that I feel like the role of story and the way that it holds us together or not, in terms of the power of memes today. I'm curious if you've been thinking about that piece of this.
Yeah, I actually love what you just brought up of reading and writing because that was one of the most fascinating things I learned is how writing was seen as an ancient form of artificial intelligence because at the time it was created, it was this very mystical but also often misunderstood technology because for the first time we were able to tell stories and separate the message from the messenger and travel across distances to send a message, which was never done before. And at the same time, the ability to read and write was only for the highly educated and wealthy and privileged. So at that same time, it was not a widely distributed skill, which felt very much like the beginning of AI, where it felt very complicated and it felt like only really smart people are able to build or engineer their own AI systems. Yet today we're living in a world where we can't imagine life without reading and writing for many of us. And similarly, we're entering maybe already in a world where we can't imagine it without AI, which is also why I think it's great for young people to understand and be demystified about how AI works so that we can create our own systems and it's not this huge gap between who's creating the AI and who's using it.
I think a lot about young people. I have two little girls. I think they're growing up in a very unusual world compared to one that I grew up in. And as we talk about the future, I mean, that's literally what we're talking about as far as what are they going to do with all this stuff? What do you do? You do any work that speaks with educators or with people that are interacting with it? Again, I often worry about all these tools and the settings that they're being built in. I'm like, are there enough parents in those rooms that are thinking about the impacts of these technologies? I somehow suspect in the Instagram room there weren't very many parents. So I don't know. When we talk about the future, when we talk about the impact of this stuff, what are your thoughts in terms of like the actual generation that is living in that future right now? There's going to, I mean.
I just got off a weekend of speaking to over 600 educators and change makers and innovators and in the education space that are both shaping curriculum in the classroom with young people and everything in between. And it was all about how AI is reimagining education and how to navigate that in the classroom and beyond. And I actually got the chance to speak to the first humanoid robot citizen, Sophia, about also her vision for how AI can positively transform education. Because on one hand, AI is already taking away this human connection that makes learning meaningful and young people, maybe their homework will only be graded by algorithms and they won't actually, the most dangerous idea is that they won't actually think for themselves because they'll just let AI do all the thinking for them, which is one of the biggest risks, which is why I think in the face of them, we need to foster our critical thinking and creativity so that we know that our own smartness and intelligence will be the driving force behind these AI tools. And then at the same
Were there any case studies that came up in that setting? That sounds like an amazing room to be in. Like, were
yeah,
there any like are there examples of schools somewhere that are sort of really, prototyping this, or what were you gleaning from
I
it?
think it's so new in a lot of these spaces, so people are still figuring out how to bring this into the classroom, and also people were there to learn how they can apply this in their own classroom. But there is a lot of examples and resources out there from fun STEM games that you can play that have sensors and plants that young people interact with that just teaches them ethical AI education. And I've done workshops with young people about understanding the bias that data has and the environmental impact of AI and how they can train their own AI systems to demystify it in that sense. And also just holding space for how AI can positively impact education that like it also people like Khan Academy, which is perhaps a case study, creating AI tutors that allow for students not to fall behind, because even in my own computer science class, I know that at first I was so confused with all of these brackets and semicolons and whatnot. But and in a space where a teacher is not paying personalized attention to the student, that's exactly where so many people fall behind and then think maybe they don't know this subject when it's not true. They just weren't really given that individualized attention to catch up to a certain subject. And it's possible to supplement that with an AI tutor that can adapt to their own pace, and they can always have access to ask questions on a certain subject and break complex issues down. And it can give personalized learning. And then in a more surreal future, it can do something like you're able to have more experiential education where you don't just learn about history leaders, but you can actually engage with history leaders by interacting with their avatars or feeling like you're transported into the world that they lived in with a certain kind of augmented reality. So it can get really exciting too.
It's interesting because it's like it's yeah, I guess I'm still on this train of like, I wonder where we're going, and it's so interesting for you to, because in education in particular, they're having such a moment, right, where, I think I saw an article yesterday, the day before, where this teacher created this assignment that AI can't do, and some kind of essay or something like that. And all the students started complaining. They're like, you made the assignment too hard. Because the students, I guess, are now, in the last 2 years, have just gotten used to ChatGPTing all their essays and their answers. And so this professor had made it harder to do that. And as a result, all the students start complaining. So it's like, we're in this kind of a weird transitional period where I guess it's just very hard to visualize what the future is going to look like. And at the same time, there's these things like what you're talking about, where it's like, oh my God, I would love to be in a virtual space where I can interact with Aristotle easily, or anybody, or Joan of Arc, or whatever, not have to read about it, which is kind of weird to say, like, I not have to sit down and read a book, but I can now interact with Aristotle. The virtual Aristotle would also quote the real Aristotle, so I might actually remember stuff, and at the same time, we have this dilemma where how do you grade, and how do you, we're inheriting this like industrial revolution age educational system that is just not at all ready for what we're doing. And at the same time, like, I, as a millennial, recognize that I have this weird advantage where I lived before the internet, and I lived before certain tools which made things easier, like Google, so that I had to exercise certain muscles that are useful for me now, that which maybe we won't be training into the future, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird juxtaposition of trying to think about what that future is going to look like, right?
Yeah, because I don't want a future where our brains just turn to mush like the people from Wall-E because we're chat GPTing all of our critical thinking away.
Right.
And so there is a distinction. So I do think there's opportunity for regulation of AI in learning environments to try to not have that future, but have the more experiential learning and more imaginative learning that is enhanced by AI instead.
I wonder a lot if, like, I don't know. I keep hearing I'm going to be doing a little teaching in the fall, and there is this sort of separation of some college education places where they're very frustrated, like, oh, everybody's just cheating all the time. And then I hear about people like Ethan Mollick and Wharton who, like, almost have created a platform out of embracing it and almost learning from that experiment of what is their classroom that is like just running towards it all the time. Um, I think one thing that I would add to this sort of discussion, I don't know if you guys followed that Atlantic article that went a little bit viral last week that Derek Thompson wrote about how there's like some real statistical downturns for college graduates getting jobs. And he was asking out loud, is AI to blame? Um, and sort of pointing to the fact that a lot of companies, that college entry level job is literally what we all use AI for now. It's like for, sort of a lot of very clerical, sort of busy work stuff. So there's an actual immediate impact that is happening on the nature of skills and employment. I know I'm just riffing here. I'm just saying I want to bring it back to this question of what are we learning, and what is that better classroom? Like, what does it do instead of teaching you to memorize stuff or do stuff that your graphing calculator used to do? Like, maybe it's teaching people to speak. Like, maybe it's like encouraging people to like synthesize ideas and have to act, what I'm doing a terrible job of right now. Of like, maybe like it's actually doing the things that it doesn't do. And actually, I wonder if that's going to be a new world of soft skills, I guess is what I'm asking out loud.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It shouldn't teach you to regurgitate information and be like a machine yourself with the repetitive tasks that we are now outsourcing, but should empower you to lead and to have a vision that you can guide other people to bring to life, to be able to manage your projects and like break things down into bite-sized pieces you're able to do, to challenge what you're being told by AI so that you can actually find the right answer, and also to fact check and keep real truth alive, because misinformation is the other thing that I think we need to protect ourselves from in this age of AI.
I don't know. I guess I'm optimistic that given the challenge, educators will seize on new things that they can now operate at a higher level. And I'm hopeful that that's what a high level education means, is that it's actually a place where we're going to get more out of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of my close friends, he runs a coaching business, and he's been kind of like building an AI tool that helps the coaches have a coaching agent that is trained on their coaching skills and their personality somehow, and then they can like now have 24/7 support for all their clients. And so I guess there is probably going to be some version of that with teachers, where I can get my teacher support based on the personality of my teacher, and at the same time access to the entire internet to supplement. I don't know. I wonder if that is, there's some version of that where, I'm getting more and more granular, not only like these virtual experiences that Anatola is talking about, but also these like, very granular sort of help that I need specifically for like whatever math problem that I have, or what, I don't know. It's interesting, but I also can't wait for everything to be a game. I just want it all to be a game, big, huge game.
I mean,
does that mean there's winners and losers?
Maybe. Well, I mean, I think you have to lose, and maybe you get you just like you get a 1-up, right? In Mario, like you die, you get a 1-up, you get a supercharge, whatever.
I'll take one of the mushrooms that makes you like super big in Mario Kart.
Yeah.
And
I just want the star where I just like run through everything. I want to eat the star where I just run through everything and just win everywhere. That's what I want.
Star. Or just the rocket that brings you to the front, but you only get that when you're already in last place, which of course I know nothing about.
all roads lead back to Nintendo and the vision of their future vision of a world where we just eat magic mushrooms and stars and travel around on top of turtles.
But another thing, Men was mentioning this being a millennial, and I've been thinking a lot about being Generation Z and how Generation Z is relating to our moment in history right now, because I've been a part of this bureau from History Made by Us, all about consulting museums and institutions about engaging Gen Z around the 250th anniversary of America, which is coming up next year. Yeah, I think that data shows that so many young people are kind of dissatisfied with the system as it is, and want to just have more of their voices heard in places of power, and want things to be more engaging and interactive for them, but also just want to be able to have an impact and be a part of things that matter. And so hopefully with AI and education, it's able to meet young people where they're at and give them this sense that they can have a voice and that they can impact change, and that now you have all these tools and resources around you to do so many things which with a much lower barrier. And so hopefully it's able to empower them to create that change and be a part of that change.
Yeah, you
Next
can
year's gonna
write
be
grants
wild.
and proposals faster now.
That too.
And therefore create, you know, you can sue faster. You can create legal documents faster.
I think just because you brought up the 250th anniversary, it's interesting. We're talking a lot about the future. What is the role of history in the future? What do you think? You're alluding to it there a little bit, but like
Mhm.
I think a lot about. I think we might rename today's episode the XYZ podcast because I'm Gen X, you're Gen Y, and
Oh,
you're
I
Gen
like
Z.
it.
But you know, I grew up with a weightier amount of history. I didn't have as much to um, you know, I even relate to it on just like even TV history. Like, you know, as someone consuming content, like my rainy, snowy day at home was just watching reruns from previous generations. I grew up watching like I Love Lucy and Gilligan's Island, shows that you guys might not know exist. But I'm just saying, even me, I was even tapping into older generations of my own, and that was part of growing up as Gen X. Is that like you sort of were almost required to absorb the history around you. I think I observe millennials, and I think your generation is having a much more aggressive age of creation in terms of like your content and media culture is one of creation, not one of absorption. And I think what happens to that sort of slow burn of actually absorbing the past to shape the future. I don't know if I'm critical of young people, but I think a lot of people should read more history. You know, I think that's just a good general statement. And even challenge the book they read and go read the other point of view on that book that they read. I think a lot of people also were falling into a lot of, you know, agreeing with what we agree with already. So I'm curious, what is the future of facts and like and basing and then learning from the past? I mean, do you think about that? I mean, just because you brought up the major kind of birthday
Yeah,
for America next year.
definitely. It's as was said in the Cars Pixar movie. You don't have to know where you're going. You just have to know where you've been. And that is the importance of history, of knowing where you've been and drawing in that history to shape the future. And you can look to history for a lot of answers and questions. So when we think about the next 250 years of America, we can look at the previous 250 years of America and explore what we can learn. And then we can also learn from other empires that have risen and fallen throughout history, and what patterns do we see there. It goes back to my idea of time being like a spiral, and the spiral is history, that it's all this cycle and this rhythm that happens throughout time, and you can see the remnants of history in everything that we do, and every new thing that happens, there's still so much to learn from history about it. And it might just look different in today's day and age. Like the history of artwork starting in caves, 60,000 years ago. And today we're talking about AI generated artwork. But what hasn't changed is that people like to create art, or even education, as we've been discussing, learning in some sort of, cut or something. And then from chalkboards all the way into these interactive tools that might come in the future. And but the common thread is learning. So I like looking at those common threads throughout history and seeing what will really always remain the same despite all the change happening around us.
What's an example of that? What are the things that you've seen as patterns, things that don't change?
I think things that don't change are really the core needs and wants of people, like the core needs. We all need community and connection and togetherness. And we find a lot of new ways to make that happen. But at the core, that's the same. So when you look into history, even though we didn't have phones in our hands, we still liked to dance, for instance. It's like that scene from Sinners with the history and the future dancing together and showing that even though the dance moves have changed, that people didn't twerk in like the 1900s, we still had the parallel way of having fun and connecting with one another.
Obviously, both of us need to see Sinners.
Yeah.
I
I don't know
think
why it's going up so much.
that's one of my takeaways. No, I mean Ryan Coogler's
Yeah.
a legend.
It's because of Michael Jordan.
He's amazing, and he's great. I want to learn about Reimagine Story Lab. What are you working on? What are things that people may want to reach out to you to collaborate with?
Yes.
And are you seeking collaborators, or what's a project you're working on that you want to highlight?
Yes, for sure. Well, one thing is our collection of visions for the future. So I invite everyone here to participate by sharing their own visions by going to reimagine.io/vision, which is reimagine with a 3, R3 Imagine. And we have some of the visions showcased in our virtual museum, which we have in-person activations and events happening. So I invite you to join and to, be a part of the community and collaborate on future events and activations that we have. And we also facilitate a lot of workshops on these topics of ethical AI, dreaming about the future, and ultimately just speaking to fascinating people about how we can inform different blueprints for where we want to go in our world, and having these thoughtful conversations and be able to create a platform to speak about those visions and think about where we want to go in the world.
Love that. It sounds like an amazing initiative and thing that you get to constantly interact with people, kind of bringing you inspiring things. I mean, I'm nervous to bring it up because we're probably close to the end, but just because you bring up ethical work, and I know that's a big cornerstone for things you speak about. I mean, I was a philosophy major, and I think when I hear a lot of people talk about ethics, I think they often skip what at least I remember being the beginning of that class, which is that ethics is another way of saying values.
Mm.
And then the ethics are where we sort of in some ways manage those values. So I always feel like people just start running off with this is ethical, that's ethical, but they skipped reminding everybody it's because we value blank.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, this is what we should do. Where do you start that conversation? Like which values are you focusing on? I know that there's all kinds of bias issues that you've spoken about, and maybe that's the one. I don't know where does the value start, and what kind of work are you working on the ethical side?
Yeah, I also think values are so powerful because you can have any new technology, but without values changing, then it's just the same. I take an example of Los Angeles. They created a new train in Los Angeles to bring more public transportation to the city, which is totally needed. But then because we have the same culture and the same values, people still don't take the train. And of course, there isn't enough of it. But I always ask that as a question in my workshops of what values do you think need to drive society? And some of the most common ones that happen time and time again is community, love. I asked a group of over 400 middle and high school students this question, and the top result was love, which I think is beautiful and an invitation for people to imagine what society would look like based in that value of love. And that all those values rise up over the values that we see driving culture today, which is usually competition and productivity. So how can you build all those things around those values? So if, especially taking that human connection that is integral to community, AI has to be a tool to foster and prioritize human connection instead of ripping it farther apart and just putting us in these siloed boxes using technology. And that is really the dream.
I love the way you said that, and I think that's actually the best way to drive, because I think I find a lot of the ethical dialogues often sort of skip this step of sort of like let's ground ourselves in why something is or isn't ethical, and at least let's either agree on that first. Because I think a lot of people who are very into like free speech and open market, there's a lot of other energies running around our spaces that they immediately sort of question somebody that's walking around saying something is ethical or not ethical. But I actually think, well, if we first met them at like, well, here's things that we share, no? And maybe we don't, by the way, maybe that becomes an interesting conversation, but it's an interesting way to meet those people. And I think we'll often bring those people with us. And I love what you said about community and connection. I think, I don't know who doesn't agree that the better outcome is that we're spending more time being human. I don't know, Min, lately you've been saying you don't want any more friends. You just want to be friends with robots. So maybe you're on the outside of this.
Well,
I'm kidding.
the irony is I think that more and more people are using AI to mediate their social interactions, right? More and more people are, they're definitely, I use it for emails, but I'm also, I know friends who are like turning to AI for therapy, for resolving conflict, for romantic, interest, right? Like how do they date? So I think that's already happening at scale. Like I think that's very popular actually for people to use ChatGPT for, because it's a non-judgmental actor that can give you a mirrored feedback and
might even be sycophantic in its support for you.
Well, yeah, that's the thing.
Lately.
But I could see.
I know what you mean.
The irony is that although people are afraid that the internet has caused us to be more socially weird, people are increasingly turning to AI to help them with social situations. Now, I don't know if that makes things even more weird. It really might, but it's clearly helping people, or at least they're using it, right?
We talked about this exact subject at TED, and it's such a dichotomy, but how people are turning to AI to help their romantic relationships, and how AI is helping people with different boundaries cross, because there's this anxious attachment style or passive, and how AI can help you communicate to someone that might have a different attachment style than you. And so the question we were asking is it good to use AI? If the need is human connection, then is it good to use AI to have more authentic human connection? Or is that cheating because you used AI to get there? I don't know the answer, but it is a question to explore.
Well, again, I was nervous to bring up ethics and stuff because I think we just figured out why you're coming back to talk to us again, because there's a lot more. These are endless topics. But what I love, I don't know, I'm so grateful for you joining us today. I love how curious you are and how much empathy you bring into the work you're doing. I think the conversations that it sounds like you're sparking with even people outside of our space, young people, to sort of, and the optimism underlying it is also refreshing. But obviously here in LA, we hope we see you in person more often. We do all kinds of events here.
Definitely.
But thank you for your time today.
Yeah.
Obviously, if people want to follow you, if people want to check in with you, where should they go?
Yes, please head on over to Anatola Araba across all platforms and share your vision for the future with me. And until then, I hope that we all have a little more courageous optimism.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anatola.